The Apache Trail doesn't just take people, it keeps pieces of them. Night after night, drivers swear they've watched their own headlights sliding along those cliffs from angles that shouldn't exist, smelled burned brakes where no car has crashed in years, and heard voices on the radio calling out mile markers that don't show up on any map. Welcome to Verified Souls, where the stories don't chase views. They chase whoever's still awake when the road gets quiet. If you're the kind of person who turns the volume up instead of looking away, stay with this episode. Let it ride in the dark with you, and when it's over, leave your mark below. One comment, one memory, one strange moment on the Apache Trail that you're brave enough to put your name on. If we were sitting together right now, maybe in some empty rest stop with the vending machines humming and the highway a low roar in the distance, this is the one story I'd tell you to make you think twice about ever driving alone at night again. Not because of anything you see out the window, but because of what starts showing up in your mirrors when you're sure there's no one behind you. I was on a long-haul run across 3 states, the kind of trip where the miles smear together and you stop thinking of places as towns and start thinking of them as exits. It was winter, but the kind of winter night that's more dry than icy. Sky clear, air sharp, stars out. The highway itself was almost too perfect. Fresh blacktop, clean lane markings, reflectors bright whenever my headlights hit them. Nothing on the road ahead except a smooth, dark ribbon pulling me forward. The kind of night that should have been easy driving. I remember checking the time as I merged back onto the interstate after a fuel stop. 1:03 a.m. The truck stop had been busy enough that I felt almost comforted by the noise and the lights and the small talk. Once I pulled away, though, it all dropped behind me like a curtain falling. Within 10 minutes, the only lights left were mine and the hard, distant glow of the occasional cell tower blinking red on some far-off hill. The world collapsed down to what fit inside my windshield and my mirrors. At first, it was peaceful. I set my cruise a few notches under the limit, put the radio on low, just enough to keep my brain from chewing on itself, and settled into that calm, focused state you get when it's just you and the road. There was no wind to fight the steering, no rain to smear the glass. It should have been one of those rare, easy stretches you almost feel grateful for. I noticed the headlights behind me about 20 minutes later. They were small in my mirror at first, pale points way back on the horizon. I remember the little flicker of relief that ran through me. Another vehicle meant I wasn't completely alone out there. I kept an eye on them without really thinking about it, tracking the slow growth of 2 white circles as they crept closer. Judging from the spacing and the way they sat on the pavement, it felt like a passenger car, not a truck. Nothing unusual. What bothered me was how steady they stayed. Most drivers drift a little. Their lights bob when they hit a patch of rough road or when they tap their brakes a bit too hard. They slide left and right within the lane. These didn't. They just grew, perfectly aligned with the center of my mirror, like they were locked onto a rail leading straight to me. No sway, no dip, no change in intensity. It was like someone had glued 2 white coins to the glass and slowly turned the dimmer up. I told myself it was probably some newer car with crazy stable lane assist and good shocks. When they got close enough, they'd pass and I'd forget about it. That's how it always goes. Except they didn't pass. They slid up until they were maybe 4 or 5 car lengths behind me and then stopped gaining. I cracked my window a bit, listening for that distinctive hiss and growl you hear when someone is riding your tail, but the night felt strangely mute. No engine, no tire noise that wasn't my own. Just the low purr of my rig and the ghost of the radio. I toggled my turn signal left, just for a second, as if to say, "Go around if you want." The headlights behind me didn't respond. No flicker of their own turn signal, no change in distance. Just that same unwavering presence, hovering in my mirror like eyes that refused to blink. That was when the first shiver of real unease moved through me. I tried to be practical about it. Maybe they were nervous about passing a truck at night. Maybe there was something on the left shoulder they could see that I couldn't. I checked my own mirrors, the wide ones on either side of the cab that give you a good view down the length of your trailer. On the left, empty lane, guardrail, the dark drop of a shallow embankment. On the right, shoulder, rumble strip, grass gone gray in my headlights. But in the center mirror, those two white circles hung on. I don't know when exactly I decided they looked wrong. Maybe it was when I realized they were too far apart, wider than most cars, almost like they belonged to something bigger. Maybe it was when I noticed they never flared when the road curved slightly, never caught any reflection off signs or markers. They were just there, constant, too constant. Without really deciding to, I eased my foot down and let the truck climb 5 miles an hour. The engine note deepened a little. The road's hum under the tires shifted pitch. The headlights behind me responded instantly, closing the gap by the exact amount I'd gained. No delay, no gradual catching up. 1 second they were where they'd been. The next, they were right back in that same perfect following distance. I tested it again, slowed down this time, dropping well below the limit. Same response. The lights shrank, then grew again until they snapped back into place, like a rubber band pulling them forward. Not once did I see the glow of their beams hitting the rear of my trailer. If you've ever been followed at night, you know that look. The glare that outlines your doors and scatters around your mud flaps. I wasn't getting any of that. It was like they only existed inside the mirror itself. My throat had gone dry. I turned the radio completely off without thinking about it. I needed the silence now, needed to be able to hear anything out of place. The cab felt suddenly too small, the dark outside pressing in on the glass. After a few more miles of that silent shadowing, I did the one thing I'd been avoiding. I took my eyes off the mirror and looked at the road ahead for a full 10 count, without glancing back. Then, in one quick motion, I flicked my gaze up. The mirror was empty. No headlights, no car. Just the distant smear of the highway behind me, faintly lit by my own taillights. My chest heaved once, releasing a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I even let out a shaky laugh. Maybe I'd been more tired than I thought. Maybe I'd misjudged the distance, and they'd turned off or slowed down far behind where I could see. I kept driving. Maybe 10 seconds passed. 20. Long enough for my shoulders to start relaxing, for my hands to loosen on the wheel. Then, very faintly at first, the glass of the mirror began to brighten. The lights came back, as if someone was slowly bringing them up on a dimmer switch. No approach from a distance this time. No gradual growing from tiny pinpricks. One moment the mirror showed nothing. The next, the darkness at its center began to glow, and the circles of light bloomed into existence at exactly the same size and position as before. Not approaching, just materializing. This time, when my heart lurched, there was no talking myself down from it. Without taking my eyes off the mirror, I reached over and flipped on my high beams, watching for the way the reflected light should change in response. Nothing. My own vision of the road ahead brightened. The signs lit up more clearly. The white paint on the guardrails flashed, but the twin lights behind me stayed identical, untouched by the change. I whispered, "No," before I realized I'd said it out loud. They answered by edging closer. Not much. Not enough to call tailgating. Just a steady, slow creep that shortened the distance between us a few inches at a time. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips. I wanted to tap the brakes, to assert some control over the space around my truck, but something deep and cold in me was convinced that if I did, if I changed anything about what I was doing without a very good reason, I would be inviting something, an escalation I wasn't ready to face. So I did the hardest thing. I kept driving exactly as I had been, pretending my world was still the same 3-lane interstate it had been 20 minutes before. It couldn't last. My body betrayed me. Your eyes can only ignore the same point of terror in your peripheral vision for so long. On the next gentle curve, my gaze flicked out of habit to the side mirror just to check my trailer's line. And there, In the reflection of that long, angled glass, I saw them properly for the first time. The lights didn't belong to a car. They didn't belong to anything that had weight, or shape, or mass you could trust. They hung in the air, level with the center of my trailer, not quite touching it, not quite separate either, like they were being projected from inside the darkness itself. Around them, where there should have been the faint suggestion of a hood, or a grill, or even the hint of a windshield, there was only absence. A patch of night that wasn't reflecting anything at all. No road, no posts, no markers. Just a hole being pulled along at the same speed as my truck. In that moment, I finally understood the strangest part. They weren't following me. They were attached to me, moving with me without needing the road at all. The realization did something ugly to my sense of balance. For a split second, it felt like the whole rig lifted, like the tires had left the ground, and we were all just hanging there, suspended by those impossible lights. I gripped the wheel so hard my hands hurt. Then, as if some invisible tension snapped, everything dropped back into place. The hum of the tires returned. The steering steadied. The lights shifted. They rose, not fast, not theatrically, just upward, until they were level with the top of my trailer, then higher, until they hovered above the level of the cab, still dead center in the mirror. I shouldn't have been able to see them at that angle. I should have been staring at empty sky. But there they were, two cold coins pressed against the glass, staring down. For the first time since they'd appeared, I spoke to them like they could hear me. "What do you want?" My voice sounded small in the cab, swallowed almost immediately by the rumble around me. But in the mirror, something changed. Between the circles of light, a third shape hinted itself into being, not as bright, more like a shadow cast by something that didn't have the right to make one. An impression of height, the vaguest outline of shoulders, maybe. A curve that could have been a head, tilted slightly, as if considering me. I didn't wait to see more. Whatever sick curiosity had kept me calm up to that point broke. I hit the next exit sign I saw without even reading where it went. My blinker flashed. My hands yanked the wheel harder than they needed to. The truck leaned, then settled as I peeled off the interstate, onto a ramp that dove down into the safety of sodium lights and gas stations. The second my tires left the main highway, the mirror went dark. No gradual fade, no receding glow, just black glass showing nothing but the faint outline of my own cab and the smear of the road behind me. I parked that night under harsh, buzzing lights in a crowded lot and slept badly, jolting awake every time a different truck pulled in or out. Every time my eyes went straight to the mirror, hunting for those impossible orbs. They never came back. There's one detail I didn't notice until the next morning, when I did my walk around before getting back on the road. At the very back of my trailer, dead center on the doors, were two perfectly round smudges. Not dirt, not handprints. Just slightly cleaner circles in the dust, about the size of headlights, side by side at a height no car's beams would ever naturally sit. You can tell yourself they were leftover marks from some previous haul, some loading bay with weird lighting, some pressure washer pattern. I tried that. I still do, on good days. But on the nights when the highway is too quiet and the mirrors feel too big, I catch myself checking the glass more often than any safe driving manual would recommend. Not looking for cars, not looking for cops, just watching to make sure the road behind me is still empty, and that nothing out there has decided I look lonely enough to follow again. If I was sitting next to you in the passenger seat right now, watching the highway slide past in the dark, this is the story I'd tell you when the conversation goes quiet, and you're just awake enough to listen. I'd wait until the road straightens out, until there's nothing ahead but your headlights and that low hum under the tires. And then I'd ask you a simple question. Have you ever stayed in a place that shouldn't exist the next morning? It started as a practical decision, like most bad choices do. I'd been driving since late afternoon, trying to make it another 3 hours to a friend's place so I wouldn't have to pay for a motel. The sky had other ideas. A storm rolled in just after 9, one of those heavy summer highway storms that seemed to drop out of nowhere. Rain hammered the windshield so hard the wipers barely made a difference. Lightning kept cutting the sky open in crooked white scars, and every time the thunder hit a few seconds later, I could feel it in the steering wheel. I told myself I could push through it. Everyone does. Just one more hour. Just one more stretch. But the visibility dropped to almost nothing. Just the reflective paint in front of me and a vague sense of trees beyond the guardrail. My hands started cramping from how tightly I was gripping the wheel. When my phone chimed a severe weather alert and I saw flash flood warnings for the area I was entering, I finally admitted I was being stupid. I started scanning the roadside for anywhere to stop. That's when I saw the sign. It appeared out of the rain like it had been painted directly onto the wall of water. A tall, rectangular board on the right, white letters glowing in my headlights. Lakeview Inn, next right. There was a little icon of a bed beneath the words. No chain logo. No list of amenities. Just the name, the promise of shelter, and an arrow that felt less like a suggestion and more like a command. I hadn't seen any billboards for it earlier. No lodging ahead notice, nothing on the map app. But the idea of getting off that drowning highway and into a dry room overpowered every other concern. When the exit flashed by, barely a notch in the guardrail with a narrow ramp angling down into the dark, I took it. The instant my tires left the main road, the storm seemed to let up. The rain didn't stop. It just softened. The sound on the roof went from pounding fists to nervous fingers. The trees closed in on either side of the access road, tall and black and crowded, branches leaning overhead like they were trying to knit a ceiling out of themselves. My headlights picked up wet leaves, muddy ruts, and finally, at the end of a short, curving climb, a 2-story building sitting alone in a clearing like something left behind from another decade. Lakeview Inn, the sign out front said. The letters were once red, now faded to a tired brown. A few of the bulbs in the rectangular frame still worked, buzzing weakly, giving everything a sickly, flickering halo. There were no other cars in the parking lot. Not one. The asphalt was cracked and veined with grass, puddles shining in the uneven dips. The building itself was shaped like an L. 2 floors of identical doors with a thin metal balcony running along the upper level. The kind of motel where the doors open straight onto the outside, where you can see every guest from the lot, except there were no guests to see. Every sensible instinct in me tensed, but the fatigue and the lingering adrenaline from the highway washed over that in a heavy wave. The office light near the front was on. Vacancy glowed red in the window. I told myself that if the clerk gave me a weird feeling, I'd just get back in the car and keep driving. Inside the office was a box of stale air. It smelled like old coffee, mildew, and that artificial floral scent of cheap cleaner trying to cover up something it's already lost to. A bell sat on the counter, the kind you tap to call someone out. I didn't have to. As soon as I stepped in, a man emerged from a back room like he'd been standing just out of sight, waiting. He was older, maybe late 60s, with the kind of face that looks like it's been folded and unfolded too many times. Deep creases around the mouth, eyes narrowed from years of squinting at the same door. His hair had that yellow-white tinge of someone who'd quit pretending to keep up appearances a while back. He smiled when he saw me, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Rough night on the road," he said, like it wasn't a question. "Yeah," I answered. "Saw your sign. Didn't know there was anything out here." "There isn't," he said. "Just us." He slid the dusty guestbook toward me, an actual ledger with lines and dates and names scrawled in different hands. The pen next to it had no logo, no chain name. I flipped back a couple pages out of habit. The last entry was from 3 weeks ago. Before that, a few more scattered entries, each weeks apart. The handwriting got shakier the farther back it went, like the people signing had been less certain about something than just their names. "How much for a room?" I asked. He told me a price that was fair enough not to raise alarm but low enough to feel like bait. Cash only. No ID check, no card. I handed over bills, and he handed me a key with a heavy brass tag stamped 12. The metal was cold against my palm, colder than it should have been in that stuffy little room. "Top floor, end of the row," he said. "View of the lake." I hadn't seen any lake on the way up, just trees and that one empty clearing. I chalked it up to the dark and the rain, nodded, and stepped back out into the night. The walk along the balcony to my door felt longer than it should have. My footsteps echoed on the metal grating, thin and hollow. The corridor light buzzed overhead, winged insects batting themselves into slow death against the glass cover. I counted doors as I went. 10, 11, then mine. 12. The brass numbers were screwed on crooked. The door stuck a little when I turned the key, then gave with a soft groan. The room inside was exactly what you'd expect from a forgotten roadside motel. Patterned carpet worn to a dull blur, bedspread in a color that was probably cheerful when it was new, an old TV bolted to a dresser, a small round table by the window. It wasn't filthy, but it wasn't exactly clean either. Just used. Thin. I closed the door, turned the lock, then slid the chain across for good measure. The rain tapped at the window in uneven beats. When I pulled the curtains back an inch, I saw it. The lake. Or what was left of one. It lay behind the building, a long, shallow basin of dark water stretching away into the trees. Moonlight sneaking through a break in the clouds skimmed over its surface, picking out the bare shapes of half-submerged stumps and the suggestion of a broken dock leaning at an angle, one end vanishing beneath the waterline. The shore closest to my room was more mud than sand, slick and uneven. Something about it made me think of mouths half filled with water, right at the moment before lungs give out. I let the curtain fall. I told myself I was being dramatic. I was tired, wired from the drive, and my brain was doing that thing it does, turning shapes into shadows and shadows into threats. A shower would help. Sleep would reset everything. That's what I clung to as I kicked off my shoes, tossed my bag on the chair, and headed for the bathroom. The mirror over the sink was slightly warped, the silvering at the edges gone black in places. The overhead light flickered once when I flipped it on, then held. I stared at my own face for a second. Eyes rimmed red, skin sallow from gas station food and fluorescent lights, and almost laughed at the idea that anything supernatural would bother with me. I turned on the shower and stepped in. That's when I heard it. Not from the bathroom, not the pipes. From the room. From just the other side of the thin door, the low wooden creak of someone sitting down on the edge of the bed. I froze, water beating against the back of my neck. Motels have their own language of sounds. You get used to the muffled thumps from next door, the distant slam of other doors, the random plumbing shutters. This wasn't that. This was my bed, my room. A specific weight settling on tired springs I'd heard complain when I tossed my own bag there. I shut the water off so fast the faucet squealed. The sudden quiet made the next sounds even clearer. A soft rustle, like fabric being smoothed out. The click of the TV's old plastic buttons being pressed, though no sound came on. Then a slow, deliberate exhale, close enough that if there hadn't been a door between us, I would have felt the breath. I grabbed the nearest thing I could use as a weapon, a metal towel bar that had been sitting loose on the edge of the counter, and edged toward the bathroom door. The chain was still on the main door. I hadn't heard it move. No one could have come in without breaking something. I told myself that on repeat as I wrapped damp fingers around the knob and yanked the door open. The room was empty. The TV was off. The bedspread was undisturbed, except for the shallow dip where my bag lay. The air felt heavier, like someone had just walked through and taken their heat with them. I stepped out slowly, scanning the corners, the space behind the curtains, even the gap under the bed like a child. Nothing. just the steady tick of the heater and the faint drip-drip of the shower head that I hadn't turned completely off. I convinced myself it had been the room settling. Old furniture, drafts, plumbing. I put the towel bar down, shut off the bathroom light, and sat on the edge of the bed, still wrapped in a damp towel, trying to get my breathing back under control. Then the phone rang. I hadn't even noticed the landline on the nightstand when I came in. An old beige thing with big plastic buttons yellowed from time. The shrill, mechanical ring cut through the room like a knife. I stared at it, some part of me already knowing I shouldn't answer, that nothing good would be on the other end at this hour. It rang again. Again. On the fourth ring, my hand moved on its own. I picked up. "Yeah?" I said. My voice sounded smaller than I meant it to. For a moment, there was nothing. Just a faint hiss, like the sound a seashell makes when you hold it to your ear. Then, layered under it, something else. Not a voice exactly. More like overlapping breaths. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. Too many to be one person. Too close together to be normal. "Wrong room," I said, forcing my thumb toward the cradle. A whisper brushed my ear. Not through the receiver, behind it. "You took my room." The words were barely formed, the syllables chewed up by static and distance. But they were there, right against the bone. I dropped the phone. It swung on its cord, thudding against the side of the nightstand. The line went dead in a flat click. I think I stopped moving for a full 5 seconds. No thoughts, no decisions, just that animal freeze when your body tries to disappear without your permission. Then I was shoving my feet into my still damp shoes, grabbing my bag, not bothering with laces or zippers. I yanked the door open, chain and all, hard enough that the cheap metal screeched protest. The hallway outside was exactly as empty as before. The buzzing light, the row of doors, the smell of damp carpet. Except one thing had changed. Every other door on the floor, every single one from 1 to 11, now had a faded "Do Not Disturb" hanger swinging gently from its knob. They hadn't been there when I walked to my room. I would have noticed. They all swayed in the sour draft of the corridor, moving slightly out of sync, like breathing. Some of them had dark stains at the bottom edges. I didn't wait to find out what those were. The walk back to the car felt like moving through a dream, where your legs don't obey you properly. The lot was still empty. The office light was still on. But as I passed the front window, I saw the clerk standing there, half in shadow, watching me. He didn't look surprised. He didn't come out to ask if everything was okay. He just raised one hand in a slow, almost sympathetic gesture that could have been a wave or could have been something like a blessing. Like he'd seen this before. I tore out of that lot so fast my tires spat water. The access road was shorter on the way back. Or felt like it. When I merged onto the interstate again, the storm was still raging, like I'd stepped back into the same moment I'd left. My dashboard clock had only advanced 15 minutes. The next day, in clear daylight, I tried to find the exit again. I drove that same stretch twice, slower this time, eyes peeled for any sign of Lakeview Inn. There was nothing, no sign, no ramp, no thin access road disappearing into the trees. Just uninterrupted guardrail and the mile markers I recognized from every other run. I've stayed in a lot of cheap rooms since then. You don't get to be picky on the road. But I can tell you this. If the lot is completely empty, if the office smells like it hasn't had fresh air in years, if the clerk seems more resigned than eager for business, I sleep in the car. And if I ever see a bank of doors lined with "Do Not Disturb" signs that weren't there a minute ago, I won't stop to collect my things. I'll walk out and leave the key swinging in the lock, because if a place is forgotten long enough, it doesn't always stay empty. Sometimes whatever's left behind gets very attached to the small rituals of being alive. Check-ins, key tags, a certain room near a broken view. And if you slide too easily into one of those old routines, it's not always clear, in that first tired moment, whether you're a guest or a replacement. If you were in the passenger seat next to me right now, your elbow against the door, your fingers tapping the armrest to stay awake, this is the story I'd wait to tell you until the highway got really empty, until it felt like it was just us, the road, and whatever else might be listening. It was supposed to be a simple drive back from a weekend away. Nothing dramatic, no storms, no mountains. Just a long, flat stretch of state highway that cut straight through miles of farmland. I left later than I meant to, the way people always do. You tell yourself you'll be on the road by 5, then it's 6:30, then it's 7, and you're still saying your goodbyes. By the time I actually pulled out of town, the sun was already sagging low, bleeding orange through the trees. The first hour was uneventful. The sky went from orange to purple to that deep navy where the world falls away at the edges. The radio kept me company. The road was mostly empty, an occasional pair of headlights coming the other way, the rare pickup passing me with 2 bright fog lights, fields on both sides lined with dark fences and the skeletons of old barns. One of those drives where your mind starts to drift because nothing around you demands attention. It changed with a single wrong turn, except, according to the signs, it wasn't wrong at all. My GPS chirped at me as I neared a fork in the highway. Instead of keeping straight like I'd always done, it told me to bear right for a faster route due to reduced traffic. I'd never seen that suggestion on this trip before, but the map showed a neat diagonal cutting across to rejoin my usual road further ahead. It would shave off 15 minutes. Out there, late, tired, 15 minutes sounded worth it. So when the sign for County Road 17 appeared, a simple white rectangle with black letters, I turned. The pavement narrowed, but it was still in decent shape. No potholes, no loose gravel. It felt fine, useful even. I told myself this was the kind of thing technology was good for, finding little efficiencies I'd never notice on my own. The last trace of twilight drained from the sky. True night settled over the fields. My headlights carved 2 pale tunnels through the dark, catching fence posts, tall grass, the occasional tree leaning too close to the road. The GPS map zoomed in as I drove, my little arrow sliding along a thin gray line. Everything seemed normal, until I noticed the screen. The road I was on wasn't labeled. The line was there, sure. But it had no name, no number, no CR17 or anything else. Just a ghost road painted in gray. The GPS voice had gone quiet. No more instructions, no distance to the next turn, just the arrow moving forward in silence. I zoomed out to try to see where I was in relation to the larger map, and my stomach sank. The gray line I was on didn't connect cleanly back to the main highway. It just faded into empty space. I told myself the map was out of date. Rural areas get skipped on updates all the time. No big deal. I could keep going until I hit a crossroad or a town. Roads go somewhere. That's what I kept thinking. Roads go somewhere. But this one didn't seem to. After about 20 minutes, the scenery started to feel recycled. Not just similar. Recycled. I passed a leaning mailbox with no house in sight. Just a faded, reflective number stuck to its side. 382. A quarter mile later, I saw it again. Same dent in the door. Same tilt of the post. Same number, hanging by one rusty screw. I checked my mirrors, half expecting to see it behind me too. 3 identical mailboxes in a row like some glitch in a video game. Okay, I whispered to myself. You're just tired. You're noticing patterns where there aren't any. As if in answer, my headlights swept over a figure on the side of the road. They were standing just off the shoulder, back turned, facing the field. Not walking, not hitchhiking. Just standing very still, arms at their sides. They wore dark clothes that soaked up the light, but the pale line of a neck and the roundness of a shaved head showed clearly as I passed. No reflective vest, no flashlight, no car nearby. Just a person in the middle of nowhere at night, looking at nothing. I glanced in the rearview mirror as I went by, half anticipating that prickling on the back of the neck you get when someone turns to watch you go. Their head did tilt, but not toward my taillights. It tilted up like they were staring at the sky. Then the mirror angle lost them. I drove faster. A few minutes later, maybe 5, maybe 10, it was getting hard to tell. I saw another figure on the shoulder, same side of the road, same stance, same dark clothes and pale bare neck. This one was closer to the lane, just at the edge of my right headlight beam. I told myself it had to be a different person, miles apart. Couldn't be the same one. As I drew even with them, they turned their head, not toward the field, not toward the sky, but toward me. I only saw their face for a second, but that was enough. There were no features, no eyes, no nose, no mouth, just a smooth, pale oval, like someone had stretched skin over an empty mask. I didn't look in the mirror that time. I kept my eyes locked on the road ahead, fingers numb on the steering wheel. The GPS, still silent until then, suddenly spoke. "Continue for 1 mile, it said in its calm, manufactured voice. 1 mile to what? I asked the empty car. My voice sounded wrong in my own ears. The device didn't answer. It just left my arrow crawling along the nameless gray line. I glanced at the clock. 11:47 p.m. It had been 11:32 when I turned. 15 minutes. That seemed reasonable. That felt like something I could anchor myself to. I passed the same mailbox again. 382. Leaning at that exact angle. The number hanging by the single screw. I looked away, deliberately, then forced myself to look back at the clock. 11:47 p.m. I tapped the face of the dash clock like that would jolt it forward. I picked up my phone from the cup holder. 11:47 p.m. I locked it and unlocked it again. Same time. The seconds on the lock screen were frozen. Cold seeped into the car then, heavy and sudden, like someone had opened all the doors at once. My breath puffed creamy white in front of me. The heater dial was still where I'd left it. Warm air still blowing faintly from the vents, but it wasn't touching the chill settling into my skin. Another figure appeared ahead, right in the beam of my headlights. This one stood in the middle of the lane. I slammed my foot on the brake, reflex. The tires screeched. The car lurched as the ABS kicked in, shuddering to a near stop. The figure didn't move, didn't flinch, just stood there, facing me head on. That same blank face, that same terrible stillness, like a mannequin planted in the asphalt. I stopped the car completely about 10 feet from it. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my teeth. For a moment, all I heard was my own breathing and the tick of cooling metal. The figure took 1 step backward, then another, and another. Perfectly straight, perfectly smooth, as if it were being drawn away on a track. It never turned, never twisted. It just receded into the darkness beyond my beams until it was gone. The GPS voice returned. "Recalculating," it said calmly. "Turn around." I thought for a wild second that was exactly what I should do. Turn around, head back the way I came, force this road to admit it was just a road. But when I looked in the rearview mirror, my stomach turned. They were behind me, not one but several, lined up along both sides of the road just outside my taillight glow. Pale faces, blank, unfinished faces, hovering in the dark above still black-clad bodies. They weren't walking toward me. They weren't reaching for the car. They were just waiting. Waiting to see which way I would choose. I didn't turn around. I took my foot off the brake and eased back onto the gas. The car rolled forward, tires whispering over the pavement. The figures at the edge of the light seemed to drift backward with me, holding their distance, as if the road itself was a belt carrying all of us along. "Continue for 1 mile," the GPS repeated. I stared at the odometer and started counting the tenths. 0.1, 0.2, 0.3. The road did not change. The fences did not change. The blank faces hovered in the edges of my vision, always there when I flicked my gaze sideways, never there long enough for my brain to fully process them before I'd force myself to look straight ahead again. 007, 008, 009. The clock still said 11:47 p.m. At 1 p.m, nothing happened. There was no turn, no junction, no "you have arrived." Just the same black strip and the same suffocating sense that I was being matched, stride for stride, by something that had no reason to be there. I don't know what finally broke it. Maybe it was me hitting some internal threshold of fear. Maybe it was pure luck. Maybe the road itself got bored. But after another few minutes of that impossible non-movement, the GPS screen flickered. The gray line snapped into a labeled road with a number. The little arrow jumped slightly to the left, as if it had been nudged back onto a track it recognized. The voices around me, because by then the silence had started to feel full of voices I couldn't quite hear, went quiet. Up ahead, through the tunnel of my headlights, I saw a familiar blue sign, Junction 1 mile, a gas station logo underneath, the kind of basic, ugly roadside sign that has never looked so beautiful to me before or since. I risked one glance into the rear view. The road behind me was empty. No faces, no figures, no leaning mailbox, just darkness and the vague outline of my own taillights on the pavement. The clock jumped to 12:16 a.m. At the gas station, under two bright fluorescent lights, the world snapped back into place. People buying snacks, a bored cashier scrolling through their phone, a trucker yawning into a paper cup of coffee. I stood there for a minute just listening to the normal stupid noises of late-night life and tried to convince myself I'd let exhaustion play tricks on me. Then, on my way back to the car, I saw the county map posted near the entrance, a big laminated thing with all the farm roads and minor highways marked out. My finger traced my route from the town I'd left, along the state highway, to the fork where I'd taken that faster path. County Road 17 stopped 3 miles from that junction. Dead end. No crossroads. No extension. No thin gray line. Whatever I drove on after that, it wasn't on the map. You can believe it was a glitch, if that makes you feel better. You can believe I drifted off, dreamed the whole thing, and somehow didn't crash. But if you ever find yourself on a road your GPS can't name where time stalls and the same thing keeps appearing in your headlights over and over, don't be braver than I was. Don't turn around. Don't stop. And whatever you think you see, waiting along the ditches, watching for you to choose, don't try to look them in the face for too long. If you were riding shotgun with me right now, watching the lines blur under the headlights, this is the one I'd save for when the road starts to feel too quiet. Not the loud kind of scary, the kind that gets in your head and waits. This was a few years back, on a winter break road trip with 2 friends. We were taking the long way home from a ski town to save on tolls, following a state highway that wound through a mountain pass and then bled out into miles of rural nothing. By the time the last of the mountain curves were behind us, it was already late evening. The sky had that deep ink blue look it gets right before it turns fully black, and the air was so clear and cold, it made every sound feel sharp. We were all tired, but it was that wired kind of tired where you get a little silly. My friends were in the back seat arguing about music, switching playlists, laughing at stupid inside jokes. I was driving, halfway checked in, halfway letting the familiar repetition of the road hypnotize me. Headlights, reflectors, dark. Headlights, reflectors, dark. Every few minutes, a farmhouse light way off in a field like some distant star someone forgot to switch off. About an hour after we left the last real town, we hit a straightaway that seemed to go on forever. Trees on both sides thinned out into open country, the shoulder narrowing into ditches. No streetlights, no other cars. It felt like we'd driven off the map and into some leftover piece of highway that the world had forgotten about. The conversation in the back seat died down. One friend drifted off against the window. The other put their earbuds in and stared at their phone, screen brightness low. That's when the first shape ran across the road. It came out of the dark from the right side, quick and low, just at the edge of my headlights. For a second I thought it was a deer. I hit the brakes out of instinct, my heart pounding. But it was too fast for a deer, too smooth, wrong shape. By the time my foot was fully down, It had already vanished into the ditch on the left, swallowed by darkness. "Did you see that?" I asked, voice a little higher than I meant. The friend who was half asleep mumbled something and shifted. The other one tugged an earbud out. "See what?" "Something ran across the road," I said. "Animal, I think." They glanced ahead at the empty highway, then back at their phone. "Well, whatever it was, it's gone." I let off the brakes and eased the car back up to speed, but the calm I'd had was gone. My hands were tighter on the wheel now. My eyes kept flicking to the edges of the headlights, searching for more movement. The road hummed under the tires, steady and indifferent. 10 minutes later, it happened again, this time on the left. A dark blur, starting in the ditch and darting across the asphalt, too fast for my brain to pin down a shape. My body reacted before my thoughts did. I jerked the wheel a fraction, breath catching in my throat. The car drifted toward the center line, tires hissing on the paint. My sleeping friend sat up with a curse, grabbing the handle above the window. "What the hell was that?" they snapped. "Animal," I said, even though I wasn't sure anymore. "I think. It's too dark to see." But that wasn't exactly true. I could see well enough to know what I wasn't seeing. There were no eyeshine flashes, the way you usually get with animals. No distinct outline of legs or antlers or a tail, just a condensed piece of dark that moved faster than it should have, like a shadow slipping out of a spotlight. We started watching together after that. All three of us, even the one who'd been half asleep. The laughing was gone. The music stayed off. The only sound in the car was the road and our breathing when we forgot to hold it. The third time, it didn't run. It stood, right at the edge of my high beams, just where the light fades into the kind of dark that feels thick. Something was standing on the shoulder facing the road. I almost missed it. For a second, I thought it was a roadside sign, just a tall, narrow shape with a broader top. But there was no reflection. The beam didn't bounce off it. As the car rolled closer, the shape stayed perfectly still. No head turn, no step back, just there. "Do you see that?" I murmured. "I see it," the friend behind me said quietly. The other one leaned forward between the seats. The closer we got, the more wrong it looked. It was the height of a person, but too thin, as if someone had flattened a human shape from front to back. No detail, no clothing, no features, just a cutout silhouette. When we passed it, there was no sense of going by a solid object. No shadow crossing our dash. It was like driving past a hole someone had cut into the world. No one spoke for a while after that. I kept waiting for a town, a gas station, a farmhouse drive, even just another car to break the feeling building in my chest. The sense that the road wasn't just empty. It was being emptied, like something had swept ahead of us and cleared out everything that should have been there. Instead, we saw more of them, not all at once. That might have been easier to explain away as some kind of mass hallucination. They came in ones and twos, scattered along the roadside, always just at the edge of the light. Sometimes they were standing, sometimes angled forward, like they were in the middle of a step and had frozen mid-stride. Once, one of them was on the center line, and I had to swerve slightly to the right to avoid driving straight through it. I say through because every part of me resisted the idea of actually hitting one, even though my brain kept whispering, "They're not really there. They can't be." The worst was when one appeared farther ahead than the others had, giving us just enough time to stare. This one stood with its back to us directly in our lane. Its outline was clearer somehow. Shoulders, head, the faint suggestion of arms hanging straight down. No texture, no color beyond deeper black than the night around it. As we closed the distance, it didn't move, didn't turn, didn't flinch at our approach. I had this split-second horrible thought. If it doesn't move, I'm going to find out what happens when you hit something that might not be solid. I couldn't bring myself to test it. At the last second, I steered into the oncoming lane, heart pounding, half convinced some unseen car would be there and we'd crash for real, all because I'd swerved for a shadow. The road ahead was empty. We glided past the spot where the figure stood. "Look," one of my friends whispered. In the rearview mirror, it was still there, still in our lane, still facing away, but its head had turned sideways just enough to suggest attention, just enough to make it clear it knew we were there. I drove faster. We finally hit a town around midnight. It was small and half asleep. One traffic light blinking yellow over a deserted intersection, a gas station glowing like a ship in fog. I pulled in without asking because my hands were shaking, and the car had started to feel too much like a moving target. Inside the harsh fluorescent light of the convenience store, everything snapped back into mundane focus. The smell of burnt coffee, the buzz of a cooler, someone scratching off a lottery ticket at a small table near the window. My friends and I hovered together near the snack aisle, pretending to browse and not talk about the same thing we were all thinking. We didn't say the word shadow. We didn't say figure. We said things like weird and off, and did you see that? Like we were trying to keep the details at arm's length. People came and went. No one else seemed rattled. On my way to the bathroom, I passed a rack of local flyers and real estate postings. One of them caught my eye. A cheap printout of a news article, taped up crooked, edges curled from being there too long. I don't remember the exact headline, but it mentioned a multiple-car pileup on that same highway a few years back. Low visibility, late at night, too many drivers following too close, reacting too slowly, not realizing there was a stalled vehicle ahead until they were already on top of it. The photo was grainy, but you could make out the wreckage, dark shapes scattered along the road, cars crumpled and spun around, everything distorted under harsh emergency lights. What stuck with me wasn't the picture, it was the location. The stretch of highway was described as a long, unlit straightaway bordered by open fields, with limited landmarks and infrequent traffic. Exactly like where we'd just come from. I didn't say anything to my friends about it then. I just went back to the car with my coffee and my forced calm, and told them we'd stick to the main interstate the rest of the way, even if it added time. No one argued. We didn't see anything else that night. No more shapes on the shoulder. No more wrong silhouettes at the edge of the light. Just the usual parade of semis and sedans and the occasional police cruiser. When I finally dropped them off and got home, the whole thing felt distant, like something I'd watched in a movie instead of lived through. Here's what made it real again. A week later, I had to drive that route in the daytime. Same road, same direction. Sun high, sky wide open, fields clearly visible. I told myself I'd be able to see it all for what it was in daylight. Just road and fences, and maybe some oddly placed signs that my tired mind had turned into something else. For most of it, that's what I got. Blue sky, brown grass, ordinary mailboxes. When I reached the long straightaway, I slowed down a little without meaning to. My hands tightened on the wheel. There was nothing on the shoulder, no people, no cutout figures, no anything. But here's the part that still bothers me. Every 50 yards or so, in the dirt just off the asphalt, there were patches where the ground was darker, narrow, upright smears of soil, maybe a foot wide and several feet tall, like something had been standing there long enough to change the way the earth dried. Not shadows, not tire marks, just slightly darker silhouettes, all facing the road. Maybe it was drainage. Maybe it was a trick of my imagination, connecting random stains into familiar shapes. I'd love for you to believe that. I'd love to believe it myself. But if you ever find yourself driving a long, empty straightaway at night, and you start seeing things standing just outside your headlights, things that never quite resolve into faces, you'll understand the part of you that doesn't care about explanations. And if you look in the mirror and see one of them has turned to watch you go, don't stare too long. The road has a way of holding on to whatever pays too much attention to it. Let me start this one with a question. Have you ever trusted your GPS so completely that you stopped paying attention to the world outside the windshield? Just followed the little line on the screen like it knows more about reality than your own eyes? If you're nodding, then you're exactly the kind of person who could end up where I did that night, on a road that didn't care whether I believed in it or not. It was just past midnight when it started, that dead hour where everything feels slightly off anyway. I was driving back from visiting family, doing that long, quiet solo stretch between one small town and the next. The highway had been simple enough, 2 lanes each way, a few trucks, a lot of nothing. But somewhere around exit 142, my GPS chimed and suggested a faster route. 20 minutes saved if I took an upcoming state road instead of staying on the main artery. I'd used that trick before. It had always worked out. So when I saw the sign for the exit, I put my blinker on and left the comfort of the familiar lights. The new road was a 2-lane blacktop, darker and narrower than the highway. My headlights carved a smaller tunnel through the night, pressing in closer to the front of the car. The screen on my dash showed a neat blue line I was supposed to follow, bending and twisting through what looked like fields and patches of forest. "Continue for 31 miles, the voice said calmly. 31 miles of this, then I'd pop out near a different on-ramp and be ahead of schedule. Easy. For the first 10 minutes or so, nothing seemed strange. The road rose and fell in gentle hills. Every now and then, I passed a driveway, a mailbox, the faint suggestion of a farmhouse light way off to the side. The moon was thin and hazy behind high clouds, just enough glow to outline the tops of the trees. I turned the radio down low and let my mind wander, like you do when everything feels normal enough that you don't have to analyze it. The first sign something was wrong was small. A green mile marker on the right shoulder that read 17. Nothing weird about that. But about 5 minutes later, when my odometer said I'd gone another 4 miles, I saw a mile marker that also read 7 to 13. Same ding in the corner, same tilt in the post, same smear of grime where someone had probably brushed against it once upon a time. I frowned, sat up a little straighter, and told myself I'd misread it. Tired eyes, dark night, whatever. Then the GPS dropped my position. Not lost satellite signal, not recalculating. The little blue arrow just slipped off the highlighted route and hovered in an empty gray space, like I'd driven off the mapped world. The voice stayed silent. The map around the arrow was blank. No road names, no intersecting lines. Just the icon of my car, moving over nothing. I felt that tiny cold drop in my stomach that comes when something very basic stops working. I shouldn't have been in the middle of nowhere. This was still a state road, paved and painted, not some dirt track. I could feel the texture of the asphalt under the tires, hear the thrum of it. But according to the device that had never steered me wrong before, I wasn't anywhere at all. I told myself to calm down. Roads don't disappear just because a computer forgets they're there. I still had gas. The car was running fine. I had a general sense of what direction I was headed. I could always turn around and backtrack to the highway. It was annoying, not dangerous. That's what I tried to believe as the dark on either side of the car grew thicker, and the moon slipped behind a thicker patch of cloud. Then I passed mile marker 17 again. I didn't even slow down that time. I just stared at it as it slid by my passenger window. The identical damage, the identical grime, the same patch of flattened grass beside it. It was impossible to pretend now that it was just similar. It was the same marker, the same physical object I'd driven past already. "Okay," I said out loud, because the silence was starting to feel too large. That's enough of that. I decided to turn around. There was a gravel driveway coming up on the left, barely wide enough, but good enough to use as a turnaround point. I slowed, signaled out of pure habit even though there was no one around, and pulled in. The gravel popped under my tires. A dark shape of a house hunched somewhere back from the road, but no lights were on. No porch glow, no flicker from a window. It felt abandoned, or asleep in a way that didn't invite visitors. I swung the wheel and eased back out onto the road, now facing the way I'd come. I expected the GPS to be just as useless in this direction, so when it chimed and the map suddenly redrew a neat route back toward the highway, I actually felt a flutter of relief. Continue straight for 5 miles, it said. Then turn right. The voice sounded slightly different. Not wrong exactly, but the tone seemed a hair slower, too careful. I shook that off too. Software updates, audio glitches, my nerves. Driving back the way I'd come should have made things feel better. Familiar fence posts, familiar curves. Get me back to the big road with other humans and truck stop coffee. But 2 miles into my return, I realized something that sent a different kind of chill through me. I wasn't seeing anything familiar. The mailbox I'd noticed earlier with the crooked red flag, gone. The cluster of 3 trees that had been growing too close together on a rise, not there. No mile markers at all. It was like I'd turned around on one road and merged without noticing onto another that wanted me to think I was retracing my steps. The GPS, though, was content. The arrow was back on a highlighted line. 3 miles, it said. 2.7, 2.3. It even showed a little icon where I'd eventually reconnect with the interstate. If I'd been less shaken, I might have believed it. I wanted to. That's when my headlights hit the sign. It stood on the right shoulder, a simple rectangle of reflective green with white letters. It said exactly what my GPS had. Highway, 5 miles, arrow straight ahead. The problem was, 5 miles had just shrunk from almost 3 to 5 again. The numbers on my dash and the numbers on that sign disagreed. And the sign, I didn't like the sign. Road signs, even cheaper old ones, have a certain look. The font is standardized. The edges are rounded just so. This one was almost right. Almost. But the letters were a little too tall, a little too close together. Like someone had copied a real sign from memory and gotten the proportions slightly off. There were no bolts visible, no scuffs, no stickers, no bullet holes. Just pristine, perfect green and white floating at the edge of my lights. I didn't stop. Stopping felt like the worst possible idea. Every instinct I had was screaming that if I lingered, if I gave this road too much of my attention, it would find a way to keep it permanently. So I did the opposite. I sped up. The GPS protested. In 1 mile, turn right, it said, calm as ever. There was no right turn, just the same 2 lanes stretching forward and backward, and the suggestion of fields beyond the reach of my high beams. When the computerized voice insisted, turn right now, I thumbed the power button and shut it off. That should have made me feel more alone. Somehow, it made me feel less watched. Without the soothing lie of the digital map, the reality of the situation settled in more heavily. My world had shrunk to that narrow corridor of light. The engine sounded too loud, too present, like it was the only noise permitted here. Even the wind felt muted, no whistling, no hiss, just a steady pressure against the car, like the air itself was thicker on this stretch. After what felt like a very long time, I saw a shape on the horizon, not a figure. Not another car. A gantry. One of those metal frames that span the highway to hold up big overhead signs. Relief hit me so hard I almost laughed. That had to be my way back. No lonely state road has a full overhead sign rig. That meant I was coming up on the interstate. As I got closer, the letters came into view. At first they blurred from distance, and the small streaks on my windshield just lines of brightness against the night. Then they sharpened. Welcome back, the sign said. No exit numbers, no arrows, no route symbols. Just those 2 words, all caps, perfectly centered. Every part of me went cold, right down into the bones. My first thought wasn't normal. It wasn't, that's weird. It was back where? I hadn't left the road. I hadn't taken any turns. And yet something was greeting me like I'd returned from somewhere. The metal of the gantry was wrong, too. No sticky black streaks of old rainwater. No rust at the weld points. It looked new, but in a way that didn't make sense for the middle of nowhere. Too clean, too intentional. The road passed under it. I half expected something to happen the moment I crossed that threshold. A sound. A drop. The engine failing, but there was nothing. just my car, my heartbeat, the tires. And then, in the distance ahead, I saw real highway signs. Multiple. Proper reflective shields with familiar numbers, the shapes and colors exactly right. The whoosh of distant multi-lane traffic reached my ears a minute later. It felt like stepping out of a dream mid-fall and finding the real floor under your feet. When I merged back onto the interstate, my dashboard clock read 12:41. The last time I'd looked, just before taking that shortcut, it had said 12:03, 38 minutes. The GPS, once I turned it back on, cheerfully informed me I was right back near exit 142 again. Nearly where I'd started, time lost, no distance gained. I pulled into the next rest area and sat there in the harsh, fluorescent light, engine off, asking myself the questions you're probably asking now. Was I too tired? Did I drift and loop without realizing? Was there a glitch in the map data that made it look stranger than it was? Maybe. That's the comforting answer. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm driving and I see a new-looking sign on a road I think I know by heart, especially if it says anything about service road, faster route, or shortcut, I feel that same thin, invisible pressure at the back of my neck, like something out there remembers me. If you ever see a sign that seems too helpful on a stretch of highway that's never had one before, do yourself a favor. Ask yourself whether saving 20 minutes is worth finding out what "welcome back" might mean to something that doesn't quite understand where you came from in the first place. Let's make a deal before you listen to this. Don't ever tell yourself it's just the radio when you hear something that shouldn't be there. That's what I did. That's how this started. If we were sharing a car right now and you were scrolling stations, I'd probably stop your hand and say, "Let me tell you why I don't listen to anything between stations anymore." I was driving home from a work trip alone, cutting through a long stretch of rural highway to shave off an hour. It was one of those nights where the sky is clear, but the world still feels closed in. No moon, just a smear of faint stars, and the occasional red blink of a distant tower. The kind of dark that makes your headlights feel smaller than usual. It was past 1 in the morning, and I was riding that edge between wired and exhausted where music is the only thing keeping your brain from slipping into autopilot. The problem was, I'd run out of good stations. I kept hitting scan. The digital numbers jumped from one frequency to another, catching a bar of country here, a burst of static there, a preacher's voice rising and falling before dropping off. I was somewhere between towns, too far from anything big enough to have its own reliable broadcasts. The radio stuttered through a few more attempts and landed on a thin, warbling mess of static that, for whatever reason, didn't move on. It just stayed there, hissing softly. I was about to hit scan again when I realized there was something under the static. At first I thought it was a song, buried too deep to make out. A rhythm, maybe. A pattern. I turned the volume up a notch and leaned closer to the speakers. The hiss thickened, filling the cab with a soft roar. Underneath it, faint and wavering, were voices. Not one voice, several, layered over each other, overlapping in half-sentences and stuttered syllables like a dozen people trying to talk through the same broken phone line. Most of the words were impossible to catch. Bits and pieces floated up. Wait. Don't. No. Then drowned again in noise. It didn't sound like a show. It didn't sound like a prank. There was no music bed, no ads, no intro. Just that messy, raw stream of people sounding scared, sounding shocked, sounding like they were in the middle of something terrible, and the signal was coming apart as they tried to talk about it. The rational part of my brain said it was some weird bleed-through from another station. The rest of me felt the hair on my arm stand up. I should have changed it. I should have laughed it off and gone back to silence. But there was something magnetic about it. Like eavesdropping on a conversation you know you shouldn't hear, but can't walk away from. So I listened. The highway stretched out in front of me. Nothing but 2 lanes and a broken center line pulling me forward. The world outside the glass turned into a vague suggestion, the vague bulk of trees, the dark smear of fields. All the focus narrowed down to the sound in the car. Static. Voices. Breaths. Then one of the voices cut through clearer than the others. "Can anybody hear me?" it said. I nearly dropped my hands off the wheel. The question was so normal, so simple that it slammed against the surrealness of everything else. The voice was male, maybe. Or just roughened by panic. Close, too close. Like the speaker's mouth was right against the microphone, breathing into it. Without thinking, I answered. "I hear you," I said aloud like an idiot talking to a dashboard. The radio responded. The static dipped, like someone had turned it down, and all at once the overlap of voices fell away. There was just one now, the same one. It was still crackling, still warped by distance, but I could hear every word. "Oh, thank God," it said. I thought nobody." The voice broke off. A harsh sound came through, like metal slamming, like a gust of wind hitting a microphone. I tightened my grip on the wheel. "Where are you?" I asked, feeling ridiculous and scared at the same time. Is this some emergency channel?" There was a pause. Static swelled, then thinned. "On the highway," the voice said. "Thought I was alone. I've been trying to get through. They won't let it carry." That last line made my skin crawl for reasons I couldn't completely explain. They won't let it carry. The road ahead was still empty. No taillights, no oncoming beams. Just my little bubble of light cutting through nothing. "Who won't?" I asked. Silence. For a second I thought I'd lost it, that the radio had finally given up and returned to ordinary impersonal noise. Then the voice came back, lower. Words squeezed through clenched teeth. "They're in the gaps," it said. "Between the stations, between the exits. They don't like anyone talking about what happens out here." A chill crawled slowly up my spine. I glanced at the display. The frequency I was on was weirdly specific. Too many numbers after the decimal. I turned the knob a hair down, then a hair up. On either side, nothing but pure, clean static. In the exact middle, the voice. "You sound crazy," I said, because I needed to push back against it to put some distance between me and whatever this was. "You kept listening," it answered immediately. "So what does that make you?" It would have been easy, almost comforting, to assume I was just hearing some late-night AM show, the paranormal call-in type where people share weird stories. But there was no station ID, no host, no break, and the sound quality was all wrong. It didn't have that studio echo. It sounded like a cell phone being picked up by an old tape recorder halfway across a storm. "My car died," the voice said after a moment. "Just shut off. Lights, engine, everything. 1 second I was driving. The next I was rolled to a stop and the sky looked wrong." "What stretch are you on?" I asked, even as a part of me already knew the answer would not help. A harsh laugh crackled through. "Same as you," it said. I scanned the dark shoulder outside my window. No stalled vehicles, no flashers, no silhouettes. The only real marker was a reflective sign sliding by. Next exit 12 miles. The number glowed ghostly white, then vanished. "I don't see you," I said. My tongue felt thick. "I don't see any cars." "Doesn't matter," the voice replied. "We're using the same road, that's enough." Something about that phrasing, using the same road, hit me harder than if it had said on the same road. Using, like the road was a tool, a channel, not just a place to stand. In the background, I could hear things now that weren't static. A soft, rhythmic thumping, like someone hitting the underside of a car hood over and over. A faint scraping. Once, a kind of high whistling cry that didn't sound made by any throat I wanted to imagine. "They're trying to get in," the voice said quietly. For a moment, the world around me pulled into razor focus. The smooth curve of my steering wheel under my palms. The faint rattle of something loose in the glove compartment. The low hum of my own engine, blessedly alive. In your car? I asked. In the lines, the voice corrected. In the lanes. That's how they find you. Sudden stops, wrong turns, empty miles. Every time the road drops out from under someone, they get a little bolder about using it. I shook my head, even though the voice couldn't see me. Why can I hear you? I said. Why now? Another pause. The static scratched at the edges like fingernails on the inside of my skull. Because you were listening when you weren't supposed to, it said. Most people drown them out. Music up, talk shows, phones. You left space. They noticed that. The way it said "they" made my stomach twist. I found myself glancing at the gaps between the white dashes on the road, irrationally half expecting something to be slithering there, invisible under the car. Can you get your engine back on? I asked, grasping for something practical. Have you called for help? I did, the voice said. Over and over. I think you're what I got. Its tone had shifted, less panicked now, almost resigned. You're saying I'm the only one hearing you, I said. For now. The radio popped, a sharp hiccup in the sound like something pushing against a barrier. If you keep talking to me, the voice added, they'll know which lane you're in. My hands tightened on the wheel. Sweat beaded at my hairline. What do you want me to do then? I snapped, fear trying its best to wear a mask of irritation. Hang up, pretend I never heard you? A dry, static-warped chuckle. That's what everyone does, it said. That's why this keeps happening. Behind the voice, the faint thumping grew louder. I could picture it now without wanting to. Hands, or something like hands, pushing up against a car from underneath, testing the metal, testing the seal between inside and outside. Exit's coming up, the voice said suddenly, for both of us. There's nothing on my map, I said. I hadn't turned the GPS back on, but even my memory of the route didn't include any exits for a while. Just a straight shot. Look ahead, it told me. Tell me what you see. I did. For a moment, there was only the endless strip of road, the night pressing against it. Then, slowly, a sign materialized out of the dark on the right. White arrow, black letters, exit 19. The kind of basic marker you'd expect at a rural off-ramp. Past it, a lane peeled away into shadow. I see it, I said. Good, the voice replied. Don't take it. A cold shiver traced my spine. Why? I asked. Because mine looked exactly the same, it said. Right before everything went quiet. The engine in the background faltered then, cutting out for a second before roaring back. A sharp metallic bang echoed through the speakers. The voice hissed in pain or fear. It was hard to tell. They're getting impatient, it said. Listen, you're going to keep going straight. You're going to pretend you never heard me. You're going to turn your radio off at the next mile marker and not turn it back on until you're under fluorescent lights. What about you? I asked. The question came out before I could stop it. The answer was a long time coming. Static filled the gap, swelling and receding in waves like breath. Too late for that, it said finally. I took the exit a long time ago. I don't think it ever really let me back on. My throat closed. My eyes burned. The highway sign slid past my window. The off-ramp yawned open, inviting and anonymous. I'm sorry, I whispered. Don't be, the voice said. Just don't join me. Something slammed on their end then, hard enough that the speakers in my car crackled. A sharp, wet sound followed. The thin whine of stressed metal. A keening noise that might have been human might not. The static rose, devoured everything. The radio went dead. Not back to another station. Not to normal static. Just dead. A flat, empty silence like the power had been cut, even though the display still glowed with numbers. I drove on. At the next mile marker, my hand moved on its own. I reached out and turned the radio off. The click felt louder than it should have. The quiet that followed was different. Heavy. Honest. I didn't touch that knob again until I rolled into a gas station 2 hours later, under buzzing lights and the ordinary chaos of people buying snacks. When I finally turned it back on, all I got was a cheerful pop song, bright and stupid. It sounded obscene after what I'd heard. I don't know if what came through that night was a glitch, some lonely radio operator with a taste for drama, or something using the wires and signals and asphalt to pass along a warning. I can't prove any of it, but I can tell you this. If you're ever between towns, late enough that the sky feels hollow, and your radio lands on static that sounds too crowded, if a voice pushes through and asks if you can hear it, your next decision matters. If you answer, don't take the first exit that appears out of nowhere. And if you're smart, you'll do what I do now. Roll the windows up a little tighter, turn the music off, and listen instead to your own engine. At least you know where that sound is coming from. If you and I were sitting in a parked car right now, engine ticking as it cooled, some empty stretch of road just visible through the windshield, this is the story I'd tell you if you asked why I will never pull over on a quiet, scenic turnout again. Not at night. Not even in broad daylight, if I'm being honest. It was late spring when it happened. One of those evenings where the sky holds on to the last light longer than it should. I was driving home from a weekend by the coast, taking a mountain route that wound through forested hills and narrow passes. The kind of road that feels almost peaceful when you're not in a rush. Trees leaning overhead, rock walls on one side, steep drop-offs on the other. No cell signal for long stretches, but I was used to that. I had a full tank, working brakes, and the cocky comfort of someone who'd driven the same highway a dozen times. The road climbs in, layers there, curve, short straight, curve again. Every few miles, there are these small turnouts carved into the mountain. Little gravel pockets where you can pull off to let faster traffic by or just take in the view. I'd never used them much. I always thought they were for tourists or people with more patience than I had. But that night, the air in the car felt stale, and my legs were starting to cramp. I told myself I'd stop at the next turnout, stretch for a minute, maybe snap a picture of the last light dying behind the peaks. Just something to break up the drive. The turnout I picked didn't look like much. Just a widening of the shoulder on the right, a short strip of gravel bordered by a low concrete barrier. On the other side of the barrier, the land fell away sharply, down into a kind of shallow ravine full of pines. There was no official sign for it, no scenic view marker, just enough space for one car, maybe two if someone squeezed. It looked unused. That's probably what appealed to me. I thought I'd have a view to myself. I pulled in, put the car in park, and killed the engine. The sudden quiet was startling. No music, no engine hum, just the tick-tick of cooling metal and a faint, constant rush from somewhere far below. Maybe a creek, maybe wind strafing the trees. The fading light painted everything in muted blue. I could still see well enough to make out the shapes of trunks and the line of the opposite ridge, but the details had started to melt together. When I stepped out of the car, the first thing that hit me was the smell. Not just pine and damp earth, though that was there too. Underneath it was something sour and metallic, like rusted metal or old blood on stone. It wasn't strong, not enough to make me gag, but it was there. And it didn't fit with the crispness of the air. I told myself it was just old brake dust from trucks, or maybe some animal carcass down in the ravine. I stretched my arms overhead, rolled my shoulders, tried to shake it off. The lookout itself was nothing special. A waist-high barrier, a drop of maybe 15 or 20 feet to the forest floor, then a slope rising again on the other side. No grand vista, no dramatic cliff. Just trees layered in darker and darker bands until they turned into a solid wall of shadow. I remember thinking I'd picked the least scenic turnout on the road. That was when I noticed I wasn't alone. Down below, near the base of the barrier, there was a shape in the half-light. At first I thought it was a boulder, or a tree stump, something irregular but natural. Then my eyes adjusted a little more, and I realized it was too organized to be a rock. Squared edges, upright. It looked like a piece of concrete, half sunk into the slope, with something set into its face. A plaque, maybe. Or a marker. I shouldn't have cared. I should have gotten back in my car and kept driving. Instead, curiosity tugged at me. A forgotten memorial in a random turnout on a mountain pass. The part of my brain that likes tragic trivia wanted to know. I hopped the barrier. The ground on the other side gave more than I expected. The top layer of dirt was soft, almost spongy, and my shoes sank an inch or two into it. The smell hit harder there. Less pine. More of that iron tang underneath. I told myself again it was just the way wet earth smells when it's holding on to last winter's thaw. Getting down to the marker meant sliding more than walking. I half skidded down the short descent, grabbing at saplings to steady myself. When I finally stood level with it, I could see that it was indeed a concrete block, tilted slightly forward, about the size of a small tombstone. There was a metal plate bolted to the front. The surface was corroded, the engraving half obscured. I had to lean in close to read any of it. I wish I hadn't. There was no name, just a date and a line that looked like it once said something longer but had been worn to almost nothing. I could make out a few words. In memory of Anne taken too soon. The date was from the late 90s. Not ancient, but old enough to be forgotten by anyone who didn't know the story. Someone had left a plastic flower arrangement at the base at some point, long enough ago that the petals were faded and cracked. One of them crumbled under my shoe when I shifted my weight. That's when the world went quiet. Not just normal mountain quiet. Before, I'd still heard the distant rush, wind, water, whatever it was. I'd heard the occasional hiss of a passing car above on the highway. I'd heard leaves whispering against each other. All of that shut off at once, like someone had stuffed cotton in my ears. The air pressed in, heavy and unnatural, so suddenly my breath caught. Then, clear as if someone had leaned in right beside me, I heard a voice. "Don't stand there." The words weren't loud, but they were sharp. They came from just over my right shoulder, close enough that instinct made me flinch and turn. No one was there, just the slope above, the barrier silhouetted against the sky, and my car sitting about where I'd left it. The driver's door was still open. No one else on the road. No one on the turnout but me. I told myself it was my brain misfiring, an echo of some half-remembered phrase, a trick of the wind, but the wind was gone. Everything was still, in a way that made my heart pound harder the longer I noticed it. "Don't stand there," the voice said again. This time, I felt it more than heard it. A vibration in my bones, in the soles of my feet where they passed pressure into the soft ground. I looked down. My shoes were planted right at the base of the marker, on that slightly sunken patch of earth. The soil there was darker than the dirt around it, like it had been disturbed more recently, even though the date on the plaque said decades. The dirt seemed to cup my feet, holding them a little too snugly. For a second, I had the vivid, nauseating sensation that there was nothing solid under that thin layer, just empty space, like a void, waiting. The instinct to move hit me like the urge to pull your hand back from a hot stove. I tried to step away. My legs didn't respond the way they should. They lifted, but the ground clung, like mud, with a grip stronger than waterlogged soil had any right to. I had to yank, hard, to free one foot, then the other. When I stepped back, breathing hard, I swear the impression of where I'd been standing remained a fraction of a second too long before the loose dirt crumbled in on itself. The silence deepened. "Go," the voice said. Or maybe I thought it. At that point, the line between the two felt thin. I stumbled up the slope, grabbing at whatever I could, not caring about the scrape of bark on my palms. When I reached the barrier and swung my leg back over, the air on that side felt normal again. Not entirely, but enough that noise returned in degrees. The faint rush from below, a bird calling once, a far-off engine. I almost convinced myself that I'd just had a weird moment, that I'd spooked myself in a lonely spot with a sad story. I climbed back into the car, shut the door, and jammed the key into the ignition. The engine didn't turn over. The dashboard lights flickered on, bright and healthy, then dimmed. When I twisted the key, there was no click, no grind, nothing. It was like the car had decided it was a prop now instead of a machine. I tried again, and again. Same dead slackness in the pedal, same useless twitch of lights. "Come on," I muttered, as if pleading with it would help. "Not here." Something tapped the glass, soft, right behind my head, from the outside. I went absolutely still. The kind of still where your body decides that if you can just become an object, the thing outside might lose interest. The tapping came again, a tiny brittle sound, like a fingernail on the window. I didn't want to turn around. Every part of me was screaming not to. But you know how it is. Curiosity and fear share a border. Sometimes they spill over into each other. I turned my head, very slowly, and looked at the rear passenger window. Nothing. Just the dark shape of trees, my own faint reflection, the ghostly suggestion of the barrier behind me. I let out a shaky breath. Then something moved in my reflection, not behind me, in the layer of glass itself, just past my shoulder, in the faint double image of my own face. Another shape shifted, taller, leaning. For a split second, it looked like someone was standing outside, close enough that their chest would have been pressed to the door, head bent to watch me. I couldn't see their features clearly, just the hint of a pale oval and the suggestion of eyes that were darker than they should have been. The tapping came again, right next to where that head would be. I didn't think. I acted. I twisted the key one more time, putting every ounce of desperate will I had into the motion. The engine roared to life. The sudden sound broke whatever had been creeping up around the car. It felt like when a nightmare finally lets go and you jolt awake, heart slamming. The tapping stopped. The impression in the glass, if it had ever been more than my own panicked brain, vanished. I threw the car into reverse, gravel popping under the tires, then into drive, and shot back onto the highway without a second look at the turnout. For a long time, I didn't drive that route at all. If my GPS tried to push me toward it, I ignored it, adding extra miles just to keep away. When I finally worked up the nerve to take it again in full daylight, I kept telling myself I'd stop, that I'd prove it was just a normal pull-off. But when the turnout came into view, bright and ordinary under the sun, my hand stayed glued to the wheel. There was no car parked there, no sign, no indication that anyone ever used it. If you weren't looking, you might miss it completely. Down in the ravine, though, past the barrier and half hidden by brush, a rectangle of concrete still leaned at a slight angle, catching light differently than the rocks around it. I saw it just long enough to know it was real. Then the curve of the road took it out of sight. I've thought a lot about that voice, about the feeling in the ground. Maybe something terrible happened in that spot. An accident, a slide, something that prompted someone to put a marker where no one would ever visit it. Maybe years of grief and fear and memory pooled there, until they thickened into something that could whisper when a living weight stepped on it. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe whatever is under certain pieces of asphalt isn't just dirt and rock. Maybe there are places where the road presses down over more than broken stone and old roots, and sometimes, when it gets quiet enough, they push back. Either way, here's what I'm telling you, sitting beside you like I promised I would. If you ever pull off at some tiny empty turnout that doesn't show up on your map, and you see an old marker down below where no one visits anymore, stay on your side of the barrier. Whatever memory that ground is holding on to doesn't need your weight to wake up again. If you've ever woken up from a dream and for a few seconds had no idea where you were, you know the exact feeling I had in the middle of this drive. Except I was wide awake, doing 60 on a straight stretch of highway with nowhere to pull over and no good reason for my brain to be telling me I didn't belong in my own body. It started out as one of those calm, almost boring night drives. I was heading back from visiting family, long interstate behind me, now on a smaller highway that cut between towns. It was late, but not absurdly. just past midnight. The sky was clear, the air dry, the road quiet. My headlights washed over passing reflector posts. The white line ticked by in a steady, hypnotic rhythm. I had a thermos of coffee in the cup holder, a podcast murmuring low from the speakers, and that half-settled, half-floating feeling you get about 3 hours into a solo trip. Nothing about it felt threatening, just empty. The first crack in that normalcy was so small I might have missed it if I hadn't happened to glance at the dashboard when I did. The fuel gauge dipped. Not a slow, gentle descent, the kind you see happening over hours, but a tiny sharp twitch downward, like the needle had hiccuped. Then it bounced back to where it had been. I frowned, checked the numbers. According to my last fill-up, I had plenty left. The engine sounded fine, no warning lights. I told myself it was just a loose sensor, a bump in the road jarring the needle. That's what I decided, right up until it did it again, a little harder this time, like something had given the whole car a quick, invisible jerk. I tightened my hands on the wheel. Out ahead, the road stayed perfectly straight. If you've ever driven a stretch long enough, you know how you start looking for anything, an overpass, a billboard, a weirdly shaped tree, just to prove you're still moving through a world that has details. There was nothing, just black fields, the occasional stand of leafless trees, and my own corridor of light. I turned the podcast off. The sudden silence inside the car made the hum of the tires louder, the faint rattle in the passenger door more obvious. I cracked the window a bit to let in some air. Cold rushed in, smelling like dry dirt and distant exhaust. No other cars. No engine sounds but mine. The third time the gauge dropped, it stayed there. It went from just under 3/4 to just above empty in the span of a breath, like someone had reached in and pinned it there. My chest clenched. I checked the trip meter, did the math automatically. It was impossible. I hadn't driven nearly far enough to burn that much. I'd topped off at the last town. The car wasn't stalling, wasn't coughing. But that needle, that stupid little arrow, was now resting almost all the way at the bottom, and the low fuel light blinked on with a soft, insistent glow. That's when I noticed my hands didn't feel like my hands. It's hard to explain if you've never had it happen. They were attached, obviously. They were holding the wheel. But there was this lag. My brain would tell my fingers to flex, and there'd be a beat too long before I felt the motion, as if the signal had to travel a longer distance than usual. I stared at my knuckles in the dim dash light, the reflected pale of my skin. They looked wrong, too thin, too long. Like I was borrowing someone else's grip. A pressure built behind my eyes, the kind that usually means a headache is coming. Except it wasn't pain, more like someone had lowered a thin, transparent film between me and everything I was looking at. The road, the hood, my own reflection in the rear view. All of it felt half a step to the left of where it should have been. And then, very quietly, a thought slipped up from somewhere I didn't like. This isn't your route. I don't mean the practical voice that tells you you missed a turn. I mean something deeper. A bone-level certainty that this particular combination of asphalt, sky, and darkness had not been meant for me. Like I had taken someone else's place by mistake. The fuel light blinked again. Out of reflex, I looked for the next sign. Any sign. Exit, distance marker, anything. For a long minute, there was nothing but the faint silver of posts. Then finally, a green panel appeared in the high beam wash on the right. It was one of those simple ones. White numbers, town name, mileage. I squinted as it slid into view. No town, no name. Just 3 words. Turn around now. I actually laughed. A short, hysterical bark that didn't sound like me at all. It had to be some kind of vandal's joke. Teens with stencils and reflective paint. But it didn't look spray-painted. It looked official. Same font, same borders, no drips, no streaks. And the angle of it, the way it sat in the ground, it had been planted there, not slapped up in the dark. You're tired, I told myself, out loud. My voice shook. Keep going to the next real exit. Find a gas station. That's all this is. The voice that answered didn't come from the radio, or from outside. It came from the same place the earlier thought had come from, a spot just behind my left ear, where memories and instincts blur. You're not supposed to be here. My fingers went numb for a second. The wheel felt slippery. I forced myself to squeeze harder, to feel the grain of the leather under my skin. I didn't recognize the pattern. My own car, and the wheel felt unfamiliar. The road, meanwhile, stayed maddeningly the same. No curves, no overpasses, no signs of a town's glow bleeding up over the horizon. The sky ahead was a flat black wall. The fuel needle dropped the final fraction to dead empty. The car did not slow. No sputtering, no loss of power. The RPM stayed steady. The engine hummed. Only the dashboard insisted I should have been coasting to a stop on fumes long ago. That disconnect, numbers declaring one reality while my senses reported another, did something strange to my sense of time. It felt like I was floating in a pocket where the usual rules had been gently but firmly rewritten. "Fine," I whispered. "Fine, I get it. Wrong road, I'll turn." Up ahead, like it had heard me, another sign appeared. "U-turn ahead. Authorized vehicles only." I almost cried with relief. I didn't care about rules. I just needed a way to not keep going forward into whatever this was. The sign passed, and a wide paved break opened in the median. A proper, legal U-turn spot. The kind they use for maintenance trucks and cops. I slowed, checked my mirrors out of sheer habit, and steered into it. When I looked left to check for oncoming traffic on the other side of the highway, my stomach dropped. There was no other side. Beyond the median, where there should have been mirrored lanes and their own white lines and rumble strips, there was nothing but a ditch and a steep rise into trees. No pavement, no reflective posts. My headlights hit raw dirt and brambles, the lanes I had been imagining, the ones in my peripheral awareness since I left the main interstate, simply did not exist. The car rolled to a stop in the middle of the crossover. The engine idled, patient. "You can stay," that inside voice suggested calmly. "It'll sort itself out. Roads lead somewhere. Just keep moving." Every survival instinct I had screamed not to listen. I threw it in reverse, backed awkwardly into the lane I'd just come from, then forced myself to do the ugliest three-point turn of my life on that narrow strip of asphalt until I was facing the way I'd come. Back toward the familiar. Back toward the last exit I recognized. The moment I straightened the wheel and pressed the gas, a physical sensation washed over me, like the air had been thick honey before and suddenly thinned back to water. My ears popped. The pressure behind my eyes eased. For a second I felt light. Wrong light. The kind that comes after you've been holding your breath without knowing, but still lighter. In the rearview mirror, the stretch of road I'd almost driven into looked different. The darkness there seemed denser. The white lines fuzzed at the edges like I was seeing them through heat ripples. And far, far ahead, where my lights couldn't possibly have reached, something glowed faintly. A soft, low line across the asphalt, like an exit ramp opening into nothing. I didn't look for long. As I drove back, mile by mile, the fuel gauge crept up. Not in smooth motion, more like it was catching up in jumps, first to a quarter, then, 10 minutes later, to half. By the time I saw the familiar outline of an actual exit sign with a town name I recognized, it was back where it had been when all this started. At the gas station, under fluorescent lights and the friendly ugliness of concrete and plastic, I checked everything. Tank intact, no leaks, computer fine, no codes, no alerts. The attendant behind the counter asked how my night was going, and I almost told them the truth. Instead, I said, "long," and left it at that. The real kicker came a week later, when curiosity finally pushed me to look up that highway on an actual paper map. I traced my route with a finger, found the stretch I'd been on, checked for any crossovers, any authorized U-turns. There weren't any. Not on that section. Not for 20 miles in either direction, according to the map, and later, according to the highway department's own site when I checked from home. That median was solid. No breaks, no official turnarounds, and there was definitely no exit down the line where I'd seen that faint, impossible glow. Now, when I drive at night and the GPS cheerfully suggests a reroute that shaves off a few minutes, I pay a lot more attention to what my body's doing. If my hands start to feel wrong on the wheel, if the air feels thicker than it should, if I pass the same meaningless marker twice, I listen to that. Because here's what sits in the back of my head every time I think about that wrong stretch of highway. Someone was supposed to take that road. Someone for whom that route was the last one. And for a little while, I was in their place. I don't ever want to find out what happens when the road decides it's tired of waiting for the right driver and settles for whoever doesn't turn around in time. If you were riding with me right now and the road had gone quiet enough that you could hear every little click and rattle in the car, this is the point where I'd ask you a question that sounds like a joke but isn't. If you woke up driving, how sure are you that you were the one who started the trip? This happened on a Sunday night at the tail end of a long weekend. I'd worked a late shift, crashed hard for a few hours, then decided, stupidly, to start an overnight drive to get a jump on the week. I told myself I'd had enough sleep. I told myself coffee could cover the rest. You can probably already hear where this is going. The first part of the drive is a blur in the way all normal drives are. Lane changes, a couple toll booths, the glow of other people's lives smearing by in lit windows. What I remember clearly starts later, when the traffic thinned out and the highway narrowed from 4 lanes to 2. I was on a straight stretch of road I know too well. No curves, just a black ribbon unspooling through empty country. The clock on the dash said 2:03 a.m. A podcast was playing low, something about history or science, just enough to keep my brain from sinking into white noise. My eyes were dry but not burning, my hands steady on the wheel. And then, with no sense of time having passed between 1 second and the next, I was somewhere else. Same car, same seat, same hands on the wheel, but the podcast was gone. The radio was off. Outside the windshield, the world had changed. No more flat fields, no highway lights. I was rolling along a narrow, tree-choked road I'd never seen before, my headlights catching trunks that leaned in too close. Branches clawing at the sky. The clock said 3:41 a.m. I jerked so hard my shoulder twinged, instinctively slamming my foot on the brake. The belt locked across my chest. The car shuddered and slowed, tires grumbling against rougher asphalt than I'd felt earlier. My heart kicked into overdrive. That disorienting double beat you get when you stand up too fast, only I was sitting down, moving, awake. At least I thought I was. The first thing I did was say out loud, no, nope, absolutely not, because hearing my own voice anchored me in a way nothing else did in that moment. It sounded like me, shaky, but mine. The steering wheel under my fingers felt real. The fabric on the seat felt rough where it dug into the back of my leg. The cold air leaking through the vents smelled like wet leaves and something faintly sour. I looked for the last road sign I remembered, the last landmark, anything to bridge the gap between what I knew and where I suddenly was. There was nothing, just trees on both sides, wet ditch, the narrow double yellow line ahead of me disappearing into dark. I checked my phone in the cup holder, battery at 62%. Time, 3:41 a.m. matching the dash. No new notifications, no missed calls. No evidence that I'd been out for over an hour besides the jump in the numbers and the fact that the world outside the car was wrong. How did I get here? I asked the empty air. The part of me that wanted to be rational, still clinging to some kind of safety, said microsleep. That I'd driven on autopilot, too exhausted to form memories, and my brain had simply failed to record the last 90 minutes. It happens, right? People doze with their eyes open. They miss exits. They come to it their driveway with no recollection of the streets in between. Sure, fine. That's one explanation. Except my gas gauge had dropped as if I'd driven those miles. The trip meter had ticked up. But my body didn't feel like it had been driving that long. I wasn't stiff. My eyes weren't gritty. It was like stepping through a door you didn't know was there. And something else was off. The mirrors. Every driver knows, without consciously thinking, what their mirrors are set like. The angle, the slice of rear window you see, the way the road curves away behind you. Mine were wrong. Just slightly, enough that the blind spots had shifted. Whoever I had been for that missing hour, they'd adjusted them. Or something had. I reached up and moved the rear view back to where it felt right, where it showed the square of my rear window instead of too much ceiling. The instant my fingers touched the glass, a cold shock ran down my arm, like I'd grabbed metal left in snow. It wasn't wet. It wasn't actually cold when I pressed my palm against it again. But that first touch felt like dipping my hand into water someone had just pulled a body out of. In the mirror, the road behind me was nothing but darkness. No headlights, no reflective dots, just a tunnel that stopped abruptly where my taillights ended. I swallowed, turned the radio back on, hoping for the comfort of human voices, even annoying ad jingles. Static crackled, then gave way to some generic late-night DJ chattering about traffic and weather, except the town names were wrong, places I'd never heard of. Routes that didn't match any road near where I live. It took me a second to realize why my skin prickled. They weren't just unfamiliar. They weren't anywhere near my state. I looked at the display. The station ID rolled across in bright digital letters. It was a frequency I'd used at home dozens of times. Local, predictable. There was no physical way I should have been picking up some far-off regional broadcast. Not with my little stock antenna. Not under this heavy canopy of trees. I shut the radio off again. The silence felt thick. Up ahead, something pale flickered in the corner of my right headlight beam. A sign. I slowed a little, heart thumping in my throat, needing it to say something normal. Speed limit, curve ahead, anything. It was a simple rectangular board with a reflective white face. When my headlights hit it fully, black letters jumped out. You missed it. That was it. No route number, no symbol. Just those 3 words, big and clean and perfectly centered. My first reaction was anger. It's stupid, but that's where my panic went in that second. Missed what? An exit. A turn. My life. Some cosmic joke. I passed the sign and immediately checked the mirror, because of course I did. The sign was still there, but the words were different. You took it, the reflection read. I stared harder, willing it to resolve back into what I'd seen. The glass just bounced my own eyes back at me, wide and shining in the dashlight. That was when the feeling hit, stronger this time, that I was sitting slightly to the side of myself, like my body and my sense of me had been separated by the width of a sheet of paper, and I'd only just noticed the misalignment. The wheel under my fingers felt too slender, like my grip would slide right through it if I squeezed too hard. I dug my nails into the leather, forcing the sensation away, focused on the rhythm of the reflectors along the road edge, the soft hiss of the tires, the way the beams painted the asphalt ahead. Concrete details, little real things. Somewhere up ahead through the trees, a glow started to seep into the sky. Not dawn. Wrong color. This was a dull orange, diffuse and low, like distant industrial light bouncing off low clouds. Civilization. A town, maybe. A gas station. Anywhere I could pull off, step out, and prove to myself I still existed on the same map as everybody else. The road curved slightly to the left. As I followed it, more light came into view, a cluster of yellowish street lamps. A tall, illuminated sign that looked blessedly like one you'd see by any highway off-ramp. I almost sobbed from sheer relief. Then I got close enough to read it. Welcome to where you left. No town name, no population number. Just that one sentence, framed in a neat metal arch over a short off-ramp, veering away from the road I was on. The off-ramp itself sloped down into a pocket of brighter light. I could see buildings down there, squarish outlines, the gleam of glass, the suggestion of cars parked in neat rows. A whole little world, quiet and waiting. Everything in me pulled toward it, toward lights and noise and concrete and the comfort of being somewhere, anywhere, instead of this nameless corridor. My hands twitched on the wheel. You know how sometimes your body reacts before your brain. Right as I started to angle the car toward the off-ramp, a hot spike lanced through my chest. Not pain, more like electric dread. Like I'd just stepped too close to the edge of a roof, and every nerve fired at once in protest. I straightened the wheel. The car stayed in its lane. The off-ramp slid by on my right, the warm glow of the little town falling away behind the barrier. As it did, every single light down there flickered, just once. A quick synchronized blink, like a room full of eyes closing. In the rear view, as that strange little city receded, the sign over it read differently. "Thank you," it said. I drove. 10 minutes later, the trees thinned. The road widened. A familiar blue interstate shield appeared ahead with a number I recognized. My gas gauge, which had been static, suddenly updated with a tiny jerky motion. Back to the level it should have been at. My mirrors looked normal again. Angles I knew, reflections that matched. At the on-ramp, a glare of lights from trucks and late traffic washed over me. The regular roar of the interstate folded around my car, loud and crude and perfect. I didn't trust any of it until I saw a sign for a chain gas station I knew for a fact was 40 miles outside my city. That concrete box, buzzing under bad fluorescent panels, felt more solid than anything I'd seen since 2:03 a.m. I still don't know what happened in that missing hour and a half. Whether my brain shorted out on a familiar road and built a nightmare place to explain the gap, or whether there really are routes you can slip onto by accident. Roads that run next to the ones everyone else is using, with their own destinations and their own rules. I do know this. There's a particular kind of place your mind recognizes as almost home. A quiet town at night, a small grid of streets, enough light to see but not enough to show you everything. If you ever find one sitting exactly where nothing should be, with a sign that seems to know something about you that it shouldn't, ask yourself who or what is doing the welcoming, and if some part of your body reacts before you can explain why. If your skin crawls, if your hands hesitate on the wheel, treat that as the truest map you've got. The highway back to the world you know isn't always the one with the brightest lights. If you really want this one to land, imagine for a second that we're not talking on a screen. You're sitting in your car somewhere dark, fingers resting on the steering wheel, and I lean just a little closer and ask, have you ever watched the same car pass you more than once, on a road where there's nowhere to turn around? This was a few summers ago, middle of a brutal heat wave. The kind where the air over the asphalt wobbles in the daytime, and the nights never really cool down. I was driving back from visiting a friend who lived way out in the country, taking a state highway that carved through rolling farmland. It was late, around 1 in the morning, that in-between hour where even the 24/7 gas stations start to feel like they're running on fumes. The road was so empty, it felt almost private. No oncoming headlights, no taillights ahead. Just my car and the occasional reflective sign flashing back white for a heartbeat. I wasn't tired enough to be nodding off, but I wasn't exactly fresh either. The AC hummed, doing its best against the leftover heat baked into the car. The radio was down low. I remember being hyper-aware of the sound of my own tires, that constant grainy whisper that's always there, but you usually tune out. It was one of those nights where every little sound feels magnified because there's nothing to drown it out. I first noticed the car when it passed me from behind. Silver sedan, mid-size, nothing special. It eased up in my rear view like any normal vehicle, blinked once with its signal, then slid into the other lane and went by. I caught a glimpse of the driver as it pulled ahead, just a profile in the glow of their dash, nothing that stuck. The car was clean, looked fairly new, and their taillights had this distinctive shape, two curved red bands that almost met in the middle but didn't. Just enough of a detail to snag in my brain. I watched those taillights shrink ahead of me for a while, then disappear over a shallow rise. Normal, uneventful. I went back to my own lane, my own speed, my own thoughts. Maybe 15 minutes later, another pair of headlights appeared in the rear view, bright, steady, gaining on me with the same gradual approach. I didn't pay much attention at first. Then the déjà vu hit. A weird, low feeling in my stomach before my brain caught up to why. Same shape, same distance between the lights, same way they held steady in the center of the mirror, not drifting. I told myself a lot of cars look alike at night, that I was being ridiculous. But when it slid into the passing lane and pulled up alongside me, something cold slid under my ribs. It was the same car, same make, same model, same little dent in the rear quarter panel I hadn't consciously registered the first time, but now recognized as if I'd seen it for years. As it moved past, I glanced at the back. Same taillights, those two curved red bands not quite touching. My chest tightened. I checked the road around me, more carefully this time. There were no exits between where it had first passed me and now. No turnoffs. No side roads branching off into the dark. Just straight highway. For that car to fall behind me again without me noticing, it would have had to slow to a crawl, let me get way out ahead, then accelerate back up. And if it had done that, I would have seen its headlights in the mirror, closing the distance. But I hadn't. One moment, I was alone. The next, there it was, resting in my blind spot until it decided to pass. It pulled ahead exactly the way it had before. Smooth, unhurried, confident. I watched longer this time, tracking the way the taillights cut through the dark. They grew smaller, smaller, then vanished over the same kind of shallow hill. I told myself maybe there had been an unmarked pullout, some farm road hidden by trees, something. I told myself this every time my fingers started to slip on the wheel from sweat. I turned the radio up, then back down when the music felt too loud for the emptiness outside. Another 15 minutes crawled by. Headlights appeared in the rear view. At first, I refused to look directly. I watched them from the corner of my eye, hoping to prove they were different. A truck, maybe, or an older car with more yellowed beams. But the longer they stayed back there, the less I could pretend. Same distance, same almost too smooth way of holding center, like they were glued in place. Don't, I whispered to myself. Don't be the same. They slid into the passing lane. As the car drew even with mine, I forced myself to look. My breath caught. Same silver paint. Same profile of the driver's head, silhouette lit from below. Same air freshener hanging from their mirror. A dark little shape, spinning lazily. Only one detail was different now, and that was somehow worse. The driver didn't glance over this time. The first two passes I'd felt, in that vague, shared roadway, that they were aware of me. That subtle micro-movement people do. This time, there was nothing. Their head was too still, too straight, like they were a mannequin propped in the seat. The hands on the wheel looked wrong, fingers curled in an identical arc at 10 and 2, not shifting, not flexing. The sedan pulled ahead yet again, reoccupying its role as the only set of taillights on the road. Same distance, same unbreakable speed. My heart was pounding hard enough now that I could feel it in my throat. I kept my eyes locked on those red curves longer, waiting to see them finally peel off somewhere. Prove I was twisting coincidences into something else. They didn't. They vanished over a rise. I considered pulling over, just getting off onto the shoulder, letting whatever loop this was play out without me in it. But the idea of stopping out there in that huge, pressing dark, with that same car now, somewhere ahead, or behind, or both, made my skin crawl worse than staying in motion. So I did what we always do when the brain can't make sense of something. I made a rule for myself. If it passed me again, and I was certain this wasn't just tired nerves, I'd turn off at the next available exit, no matter how far out of the way it was. I didn't have to wait long. The fourth time, there was no buildup, no slow approach in the mirror, no distant glow resolving into familiar beams. One blink, and I was alone. The next, headlights bloomed in the rear view like they'd been there all along, and I'd simply failed to register them. My fingers went ice cold. They changed lanes without signaling, glided up alongside me. This close, I should have been able to see the driver's face. Even in the dim cabin, even with the angled glass, features usually resolve into something. Nose, mouth, eyes. There was nothing. Just a smooth darkness where a face should be. An absence lit from below by the dash. Not even the suggestion of cheekbones or a chin. Just a head-shaped hollow, wearing the outline of a person. I stared too long. I know I did. Long enough that the car started to drift within my lane, my subconscious reaching for the uncanny instead of the center line. The wheel vibrated under my hands as I hit the rumble strip. That jolt snapped my eyes back to the road. The silver sedan surged ahead, faster this time, cutting sharper into my lane. For a moment, our bumpers overlapped in a way that would have been suicidal if physics cared about what was happening. No brake lights, no correction. It settled in front of me at a distance that felt deliberately chosen, just close enough that if I'd had to stop suddenly, I would have rear-ended it. I lifted my foot off the gas, ready for the next twist. Maybe it would slam its brakes. Maybe it would go dark. I braced. What it did instead was break. Not crash, not explode. It broke apart like reflection on disturbed water. The solid outline of trunk, bumper, taillights, all of it, shivered. Little cracks of shadow laced through the red glow. Then, piece by piece, the image dissolved, like someone was erasing it from front to back. The road beyond bled through in patches until there was only open asphalt, where, a second before, a whole car had been. I rolled through the space it had occupied, every muscle locked, waiting to feel impact that never came. The road ahead was empty. Behind me, in the rear view, the asphalt unspooled, dark and bare. I drove like that for another 20 minutes before I saw the blessed, ugly glow of an exit. Big chain gas station, fast food signs, civilization. I took it so fast I almost missed the turn, tires skimming gravel as I left the highway. Under the hard white lights of the forecourt, my car looked normal. My hands were my hands. The air felt thin and safe again. It was tempting, so tempting, to write it off as a waking nightmare. A long blink turned into an overactive story by a tired brain. Then I went inside to pay. On the community board near the restroom hallway, someone had pinned a local news clipping. Yellowed, curling at the corners. The headline mentioned a fatal pileup on that very highway from years back. Too many cars, too much speed, one driver braking unexpectedly in the left lane on a quiet night. Chain reaction. Multiple vehicles crushed by the time it was over. The photo was grainy, but I could make out the outline of one of the wrecked cars in the center. A silver sedan with a familiar rear profile and taillights shaped like two red curves that almost met in the middle. That's the part that keeps me from dismissing it completely. Not the faces, or lack of one. Not the way it kept looping around me like I was a point on a turntable, and it was the record. It's the idea that maybe, on certain stretches of highway, some events don't finish cleanly. They echo. They wear grooves into the air. And every so often, when the night is empty enough and you're not as alone as you think, those old trajectories repeat themselves, looking for a new car to pull into their pattern. So, if you ever find yourself on a road where the same ordinary-looking vehicle keeps appearing and disappearing around you, and your gut starts to tell you this isn't just coincidence, do what I wish I'd done sooner. Take the next exit, even if it's not your exit, even if it adds an hour. Better to be boring and late than part of something the highway is still replaying in the dark.